In this second e-lecture, we're going to be discussing some media planning tools, because in your face-to-face session this week, we're going to be looking at some case studies, and I'm going to be asking you to work in groups to plan an integrated campaign based on the main adverts that we're going to be looking at. So for your final year project, as well as coming up with an idea for your campaign, you're going to also need to research which media is most appropriate to convey your message. So the research behind your media choice is going to be going into part A of your project. This is where you will show, for example, why the audience of ITV or the Sun readers or Pinterest users, for example, match the target audience for your campaign. I would expect to see your choice of media for task C backed up in task A. Instead of just stating that you're going to run a magazine campaign, for example, I want you to think more precisely about which magazines your audience will be reading. So the first step, of course, is to decide what the objective is for your campaign. The DRIP model shown here is used to support marketing communications planning and is useful when setting broad communication goals. So it can be applied when launching a new product or repositioning an existing business, for example. So DRIP stands for differentiate, reinforce, inform, and persuade. And it can be an alternative to the AIDA model. This was created by Chris Phil, and it will be familiar to those of you who have read his classic marketing communications texts. So, which of these goals are you trying to achieve with your campaign? Are you trying to differentiate a product or a service? Are you trying to reinforce a brand's message, inform or make people aware of a brand, or persuade audiences to behave in particular ways? So once you know what you're trying to achieve with your campaign and you've written a precise objective, you can start to make choices on which communications tools to use for your campaign. When you're planning an integrated campaign for your project, I suggest you focus on the advert or an event or an experience first, and then think how to support this with other tools and how they're going to be used together. So key messages should be communicated in a consistent way across the different tools and different media. And the customer really must not be confused by communicating different messages on different media. So the media choices really need to be supporting each other, because by using appropriate tools together, you can get a far better result than using tools in isolation. So this diagram here is a simple explanation of the planning process for an integrated advertising campaign. So feel free to pause the lecture at this point and read it through. So for your final year projects, you need to plan the budget, the overall objectives, then decide on the mix of tools and the media that you will be using. You'll need to come up with the concepts for your campaign that you will share with your peers and your tutors in week 6. After you have selected your creative idea, you're going to need to create the artwork specific to each medium based on your creative concepts in order to include them in your project. So there are some key planning terms that planners use that you may or may not wish to utilise when you're describing your campaign in task C. So some examples of these are reach, which is the total number of people within a selected demographic that actually saw your adverts. The frequency, which describes the average number of times a person within the target audience has an opportunity to see the advert over the campaign period. So some campaigns might aim, for example, to have each member of their target audience see their advert at least 3 times in order to have the desired impact. Coverage. What geographic area is being covered by your campaign? It may be local campaign, focused on just one part of the country. So this has to be reflected in your media choices and your budget. The effective frequency is the minimum times a communication must be exposed to a viewer to positively impact on that consumer's buying behaviour. And then the gross ratings point is the total number of exposures in a time period. So that's used by media planners to compare the strength of various components of the plan. So, for example, if you advertise to 30% of the target audience and give them 4 exposures, you would have a GRP of 120, gross ratings point. So in task C, your final task, the most effective way to communicate how you've planned your campaign, the tools and the media and the timescales, is to use a media plan. So this is a visual representation of your entire campaign. What comes first, what comes last, what happens throughout. So are there any key events for the date, for example, that need to be worked around, such as a festival or a product launch? So that needs to be included in your media plan and the timescale. So this allows you to communicate all these things clearly and succinctly. So a media plan should include a list of the tools and the media that you're going to use, and possibly what creative is being used at different points in the campaign. There might be a different message at the beginning compared to the end of the campaign, for example. So you don't need to detail the actual format of the advert to the same degree, as you can see in the example shown here. And you can use your own creativity to come up with the best way of visually representing this information. I suggest you look at examples of media plans and come up with a way that works best for you. So the next and final e-lecture is going to be outlining the costs of the different media that you will need to consider in order to cost out your campaign.